Now, you guys, some of you may know that I put out a video, an editorial video a little while ago that was called A Disney Star Wars Fan, because I'm a fan of the Disney Star Wars movies. I am, for the most part. A Disney Star Wars fan's reasons on why The Rise of Skywalker did not work, because I really didn't like The Rise of Skywalker. And one of the main things that I said, one of the main culprits for me of The Rise of Skywalker not working, and for a lot of people it did work, and that's great. I'm just talking from my own perspective. But one of the reasons to me that did not work, and I made this was one of the big pinnacle things of the entire editorial, there was no plan. They clearly, you got a sense of the lack of plan when we got into The Last Jedi, but it really became clear there was no plan from the beginning once we got into The Rise of Skywalker. And that is one of my biggest criticisms, or maybe it's more fair to say the source of my criticism because that kind of became the underlying problem for all the other problems that kind of unfolded, was this lack of foundational plan right from the beginning. Anyway, to really drive that point home, John Boyega came out recently and criticized the fact that they didn't really have a plan for his character, Finn. And he said, well, they had their plan for Rey. They had their plan for Rey, to which I said, you remember on the show, Rob, I said, no, they did not. They clearly did not have their plan for Rey. And to drive that point a little bit further home, an interview came out, I believe she did it with Josh Gad. Daisy Ridley was talking to, I believe it was Josh Gad, who asked her specifically, hey, did you know about this turn they were going to do with Rey being a Palpatine? Did you know about this? And this was the first time that Daisy Ridley really gave us a clearer picture of just how unplanned this whole thing was. Daisy Ridley said the following: at the beginning, there was toying with the idea of an Obi-Wan connection. Because remember, there's some people speculating maybe there's an Obi-Wan connection. There would be a poeticness to that, I guess, if this Kenobi could save another Skywalker. Obi-Wan couldn't do it with Vader. He mentored Luke, and then a new Kenobi saves another Skywalker in Kylo. There could have been something poetic about that, but a little too contrived, but whatever. They were toying with the idea of an Obi-Wan connection. There was different versions, and then it really settled on she was no one. And that was JJ's big thing. When J.J. Abrams, when The Force Awakens was coming out, he did all these interviews about how important it was to him that Rey be nobody and all that kind of stuff. Well, now it turns out that was a lie, Rob, because he was saying, oh, no, it's absolutely foundationally important to me that she's no one. But you were just toying with the idea of making her a Kenobi. Anyway, let's finish what she said. And then it really went to she was no one. And then it came to episode 9, and JJ pitched me the film and was like, oh yeah, Palpatine's granddaughter. And I was like, awesome. And 2 weeks later, he was like, oh, now we're not sure. So he kept changing. Here's the key part, Rob. Even while filming, I wasn't sure what the answer was going to be. Let me read that again. This is how chaotic things can get if you don't start with a game plan. Even while filming, I wasn't sure what the answer was going to be. Okay. I'm not going to get completely outraged and upset over this because, the foundational lack of a plan is something we've already talked about and that we already knew. That was clear. And Rob, I've said before that much like with a professional sports team, if you don't have a plan, you might be able to get away with it for a little bit. Like if you got really good talent, you can get away with not having a plan for a while, but eventually that's going to catch up with you. If you don't have a solid game plan, all that kind of stuff, and what your team is and the direction of your team, eventually it will catch up with you. With the Force Awakens, I thought that movie was great. I thoroughly enjoyed The Force Awakens. I thought it was fantastic. I love it. But that's fine your first movie out of the gate, you might be able to cover up the fact that you don't have a long-term plan. As we got into The Last Jedi, which I like, there's certainly problems I have with it, but overall I like The Last Jedi, but it started to become a little bit apparent. Not so much with Rey, but when you start to look at some of the other characters, it started to become apparent there was no long-term plan here. Like, really? The idea was always to send Finn off to some casino planet hijinks? Really? And then once you got into The Rise of Skywalker, Rob, it just kind of blew the doors off that. It just kind of blew that all wide open. There was no plan. They were making this up, flying by the seat of their pants. And ultimately, you know, Rob, I've always said, Kathleen Kennedy, if there was a Hall of Fame, a Hollywood Hall of Fame, Kathleen Kennedy is a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest producers ever in the history. Her resume stands up against any filmmaker in the history of the business. However, I've always said the number one issue with her being the head of Lucasfilm is her inability to do the number one job, which is to properly vet and make sure they're hiring directors and filmmakers that they are totally in sync with, understand the vision that they have, and they understand the vision that the filmmakers have, and go. They have dropped the ball on that again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And the number two big thing here is, hey, if you're going to start a new Star Wars trilogy, you've had years to prepare. Chart it out first. Chart it out. And they never did. And they never did. And now we've got stuff like even one of the stars of the movie saying, yeah, it was going to be kind of one thing, then they settled on this, and then they changed to that, and then even while we were on set, I wasn't even clear about what it was we were doing. And it's an unfortunate thing. And Rob, I think that's why, to me, like outside of The Force Awakens, which I thought was a really strong start, and I really enjoyed The Force Awakens a lot, it's not surprising then you look at, since they didn't have long-term planning, their one-shot movies were almost better than their trilogy movies outside of maybe The Force Awakens. When you look at Rogue One and what they did with that one-shot thing, you know, or I even thought, you and I both really like Solo. We both think Solo is a really fun, good movie. Again, didn't have to have a long-term plan, one-shot movies, but it's a frustrating thing to read. We already knew, but it's still frustrating to read in here. Rob, when you read comments like this, what's your first thoughts and your first reaction?
Well, that Disney as a corporate entity blew $1 billion in box office revenue by fucking it up. You know, I mean, I look at this and I think the most valuable entertainment franchise perhaps ever in the history of the medium is Star Wars. Now, it's not, you all you have to do is, here's what I don't understand. I understand Lord of the Rings was based on 3 previously existing books. But I think in terms of how to deal with the trilogy, a modern trilogy, if you know you're going to make that modern trilogy, and Disney knew they were going to at least make 3 Star Wars movies, you need to treat them like Lord of the Rings. You need to go in there and you have to have your 3 really solid scripts. Now, I would say after reading the Duel of the Fates script that Colin Trevorrow was going to do, they had a plan. You know, and it worked. They had a really solid, I think a really solid, I mean, Last Jedi had some wacky stuff happening in it, but a couple of things happened, like Carrie Fisher's death. But they made, I think, incredibly boneheaded mistakes at the corporate level, and they didn't concentrate on what their core business was. And their core business is to tell these Star Wars stories and make sure that they're good. Because I don't think a group of films has never had such global audience goodwill as Star Wars does. We're willing to put up with a lot. But I've never seen a movie that I think is as brain dead as The Rise of Skywalker. In terms of having all this mythology, 40 years of lore, how many books you could draw from, comics, the movies themselves, George Lucas, and you come up with something that is flying by the seat of your pants, the 9th film in this saga that you spent $4 billion on. I mean, I think it's an incredible failing of many people. First and foremost, J.J. Abrams. You know, J.J. Abrams, in my mind, has messed up 5 science fiction films, 2 Star Trek movies. I'm not a Force Awakens fan. 2 Star Wars films and Super 8. And why he's entrusted with the keys to that kingdom, I'll never understand. Because The Rise of Skywalker is not a movie that actually has a story to it. There's really no plot. It rambles around from place to place. and there's kind of these situations. I don't understand, with all of the history of filmmaking in Hollywood, how that's what we wound up with. And it's amazing that Disney and their filmmakers, and John, it was 5 years they were developing this trilogy. Force Awakens came out 5 years ago, 2015. And you'd think that this would be tight as a drum, that this would be the most planned, meticulous, well thought out trilogy in the history of motion pictures. And the fact that it wasn't, the fact that how do you not let your actors know what their characters are supposed to be doing while you're shooting?
Because they didn't know. Because they didn't know.
I mean,
they were still playing with it.
How do you go into a film and expect to have an actor give you the performance you want if the actor doesn't know? And how do you know what film you're making if you're making stuff up on the fly? I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that you have every resource in the world, every resource that possibly exists on planet Earth. You can get anybody to work on these movies, anybody to do anything that you want. And when you look at a lot of the art books, the Force Awakens art book, the Last Jedi art book, and the Rise of Skywalker art book, there's so many interesting concepts and cool things they could have done. Nope. Let's put the Death Star in. Well, that might be that's a cool visual, but now you have an entire sequence.
Let's not turn the story into an entire referendum on what they did as the thing as a whole. But I mean, what I don't get here is, like, you're talking about J.J. Abrams. Why J.J. going into, and just so everybody knows, I'm on the opposite side of the coin here. I like the Star Trek films JJ did. I love Force Awakens, but why not just at least stay consistent with what you yourself set up in the first film? I mean, JJ told everybody, for instance, Rey's a nobody. They had already admitted he was never thinking of Palpatine right from the beginning. Okay, if he wanted to do something that was contrary to what Rian Johnson did in, say, the Rise of Skywalker, right? Or not the Rise of Skywalker, the Last Jedi. If he wanted to do something contrary to Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi, okay, that's one thing, fine. But to go against your own thing that you yourself set up in the first one on several levels, and it gives me, Rob, an image of the Lucasfilm head offices of, honestly, kind of like the way we perceived Warner Brothers DC outfit for a long time. Because for a long time, one of our big criticisms of Warner Brothers and DC was they were very, very reactionary. Like, oh, we're going to do this. Oh, wait a second, this happened. Change everything quick, and Lucasfilm kind of feels like they started to do that. Anyway, signs of hope. I mean, we saw that video they put out recently about the High Republic, where before they started High Republic, they gathered together that huge writer's room and they charted everything out. So maybe they learned their lesson. But reading this is just, again, it's not surprising because we all knew they didn't have a plan. It just kind of really confirms it. And again, kind of flies in the face of John Boyega said, so, well, they totally knew what they were doing with Rey. No, turns out they didn't know what they were doing with any of you. So anyway, there's that. Question is, guys, what do you think about Daisy Ridley's comments? Jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. All right, guys.